The first gunshot split the still desert air like lightning tearing the sky in two, and Maria Winters froze, heart hammering against her ribs as if it wanted to escape. The echo of the shot bounced off the canyon walls surrounding her family's struggling ranch near Deadwood Creek, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. She had always known her husband, Silas Winters, could be cruel and selfish, but she had never imagined he would put a price on her life, as if she were a head of cattle to be bought and sold. "For $8, Silas said, voice rough and gravelly, his lips curling into a grin that lacked any warmth. "Any man in town can have her." "That's the price, Maria. $8. Maria's stomach dropped. The barn smelled of dust, hay, and old leather boots, the scent of dry wood sharp in her nose. She stepped back instinctively, eyes wide. $8? You? You can't mean that, she stammered, voice trembling but refusing to betray the fear gnawing at her chest. Silas's eyes were hard, cold as river stones, and they glittered with a merciless amusement. "I do mean it," he said, spitting into the dirt floor. "We're drowning in debt, Maria. You cost money to feed, clothe, and care for. You're just another mouth to feed. $8 and a man can take you away. That's the price of a wife in this town." Maria's hands clenched into fists, nails digging into her palms. She had spent years working the ranch alongside Silas, tending cattle, mending fences, hauling water in the searing summer heat, and chopping wood in winter's biting cold. She had endured his temper, his careless cruelty, and his endless demands. But this was a betrayal that went beyond words. Before she could speak, a new presence entered the barn. Harlan McBride stepped into the dusty sunlight streaming through the open door. Tall and imposing, with muscles rippling under sun-darkened skin. Long black hair tied in a warrior's braid, and tribal jewelry glinting on his arms and neck. His bare chest caught the light, every line of muscle and sinew defined like a statue carved from shadow and sunlight. There was a calm intensity about him, a predator's patience, and a man who had spent years surviving where others would falter. Harlan's gaze swept the barn, resting on Maria, then Silas, and finally the scattered stacks of hay and tools. He didn't flinch at the sight of the gun Silas held loosely in his hand. Instead, he stepped forward, boots crunching softly on the dirt floor, his dark eyes narrowed in measured assessment. $8? He said slowly, disbelief in his voice. "That's it? That's the price of a woman?" Silas's grin widened, yellowed teeth flashing. "I'm no liar, stranger. Take her and be done with it. $8. That's all she's worth." Maria felt a wave of nausea. She wanted to scream, to run, to strike Silas in blind fury, but she knew she couldn't. Not yet. Not while the stranger, this towering, strange man with the aura of danger, stood calmly, unflinching, assessing the situation like a hawk circling its prey. Harlan reached into his worn leather coat and pulled out 8 crumpled dollar bills, tossing them onto the dusty floor. "It's yours," he said, his voice low, controlled, yet carrying a weight of authority that silenced Silas's mocking laughter. "But I reckon I'll pay a little extra for kindness." Silas's eyes gleamed. He snatched the money greedily, barely noticing the tension coiling in Harlan's posture, a tension that promised swift, decisive consequences. "Good riddance," he muttered, turning toward the barn door. He left without a backward glance, unaware that he had just released a force he could never control. Maria turned to Harlan, unsure whether to be terrified or grateful. Her hands trembled, brushing against the rough texture of her worn dress. "Why? Why would you pay that price for me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Harlan's jaw tightened. He didn't immediately answer, instead scanning the horizon outside the barn, alert for any lingering threats. Finally, he said, "I don't buy women. I buy debts, sins, and promises. Tonight I paid yours." Maria's frown deepened in confusion. Debts, sins, promises? Harlan's dark eyes met hers, steady and unyielding. "You don't have to understand right now. All that matters is you're free, at least for tonight. But freedom isn't a gift. It's earned." The cool night air carried the scent of sagebrush and dust as they stepped out of the barn. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light across the uneven landscape. Maria shivered in the chill, though it wasn't just the cold that unsettled her. Harlan led her to his horse, a massive black stallion with eyes like molten gold, muscles coiled beneath its sleek coat. "Mount," he said, voice firm but not unkind. Maria hesitated, but the instinct for survival outweighed hesitation. She swung onto the saddle, feeling the animal shift beneath her. Harlan mounted beside her, calm and commanding, his presence radiating protection and authority. They rode in silence, the wind whipping her hair across her face, carrying the scent of the desert and the faint tang of metal from her husband's betrayal. Every crunch of hoofbeats on gravel and dust seemed to echo her heartbeat, fast, anxious, and alive. Finally, she spoke, voice trembling despite her attempt at steadiness. "Why? Why are you helping me?" "You barely know me." Harlan's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, dark eyes sharp as a hawk's. "I know enough. Enough to know you don't belong in that barn with that man. And I have my own reasons for being here. Sometimes, helping someone else helps me settle my own debts." The wind whispered around them as they crossed a ridge, revealing the jagged outline of the canyon below, moonlight painting it in cold silver. Shadows twisted like dark fingers across the rocks. Maria felt a surge of fear of the unknown, of what awaited her beyond the familiar suffering of her past life. As they descended into the canyon, Harlan glanced at her briefly. "Once we reach the old outpost, you'll understand more. For now, trust that survival depends on letting go of fear and your past." Maria's stomach knotted. She wanted answers, yet something about Harlan's demeanor, his calm control and quiet strength, made her instinctively trust him. She had spent years bending to the will of others, enduring Silas's tyranny, but now she was finally in the presence of someone whose authority demanded respect, not fear. The canyon walls closed in as the moon rose higher, shadows stretching and twisting like living things. Maria's fingers clutched the edge of her saddle, eyes darting to every shadow, every movement. She could feel the desert's pulse sharp, unrelenting, dangerous. Harlan rode beside her, muscles tensed, every sense attuned to the night. They arrived at the abandoned outpost as the first hint of dawn brushed the horizon with pale orange light. The buildings were skeletal, wind-whipped, and decayed, half buried in sand. The air smelled of dust, old wood, and a faint metallic tang that made Maria's stomach churn. "This is where we start," Harlan said, dismounting with the ease of a man used to danger and movement. He offered his hand. Maria took it, steadying herself, feeling the warmth of his grip and the strength coiled beneath his skin. "This is it?" she asked, scanning the ruins. Harlan's eyes were solemn. "For now. But what happens here will shape everything ahead. This place has a history, and soon you'll be part of it. There's no turning back." Maria swallowed hard, the wind tugging at her hair and clothes. The fear, uncertainty, and betrayal pressed down on her chest like a weight, but beneath it, a spark ignited. For the first time in her life, she realized she had a choice. She could remain a victim, chained to the failures and cruelty of her past. Or she could step forward into this new, dangerous world alongside a man whose motives were mysterious, yet whose presence promised power, protection, and perhaps revenge. As the sun crested the horizon, casting golden light across the canyon floor, Maria adjusted her grip on the saddle. She had no idea what lay ahead, no inkling of the battles, the secrets, or the betrayals waiting to test her. But she had survived this far, and with Harlan McBride beside her, she might just survive what was to come and finally reclaim the life Silas Winters had tried to sell away for $8. The sun rose harsh and unrelenting over Dry Creek Canyon, painting jagged cliffs in gold and shadow. Maria had slept fitfully on a tattered blanket spread over the floor of the abandoned outpost. Each creak of the wooden beams above made her start. Each whisper of wind through broken windows made her flinch. The past life she had known of farm work, small-town gossip, and Silas's constant cruelty felt distant, almost dreamlike. And yet, it clung to her like a shadow, dark and heavy. Harlan McBride was already awake, kneeling by a small fire outside, the knife in his hands catching the early sunlight. His movements were precise and deliberate, the long black hair falling over his shoulders as he sharpened the blade. Muscles flexed beneath his bronzed skin, tribal jewelry glinting with each stroke. Maria could not help but stare. He radiated a quiet danger, a strength honed by years surviving places and situations she couldn't imagine. "You'll need this," Harlan said without looking up, handing her a smaller knife. Its hilt was worn smooth, and the blade carried a faint metallic gleam. "If you want to survive this canyon, you'll need more than courage. You'll need skill and quick thinking." Maria hesitated, gripping the knife tightly. It felt heavy, foreign, yet somehow empowering. "Survive? What exactly?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harlan finally met her gaze. His eyes were dark, sharp, and unreadable. "This canyon is dangerous. Not because of the land, but because of people. Men like your husband, Silas. They owe debts. And others like them will stop at nothing to collect." Maria's chest tightened. The memory of Silas's face, twisting with greed and contempt as he sold her for $8, burned in her mind. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to take a steadying breath. "So, this is all about him?" Harlan's jaw clenched. "Partly. But it's also about you. About what you deserve: freedom, dignity, and a chance to live on your own terms." They began their descent into the canyon, the terrain rugged and unwelcoming. Narrow paths carved into the rock forced them to move carefully, and shallow streams cut across their path, the water icy from snowmelt high above. Maria's muscles ached from climbing, from gripping the reins, and from every step that reminded her of her years of labor under Silas's tyranny. Yet with each step, a strange thrill coursed through her, fear mingling with newfound determination. The canyon seemed alive. Shadows shifted across jagged rocks, wind carrying whispers that could have been anything. Echoes of old gunfights, ghosts of lost travelers, or the rustle of creatures hiding nearby. Maria's heart thumped against her ribs as she followed Harlan, his calm presence a shield against the ever-present danger. Hours passed. Maria noticed traces of movement, footprints too fresh to belong to the wind, remnants of a small campfire, a torn cloth snagged on a bush. "Someone's been here recently," she said quietly. Harlan nodded, scanning the horizon with an intensity that made Maria tense. "Men, looking for trouble, money, control. They're relentless. That's why I brought you." Maria's stomach knotted. She hadn't realized until that moment that danger had followed her from Deadwood Creek. Her life, once miserable but predictable, had suddenly become a perilous journey into the unknown. The canyon walls narrowed, funneling them into a labyrinth of shadowed crevices and jagged rocks. Maria's pulse raced with every step. She was aware of every sound: the crunch of gravel beneath her horse's hooves, the distant call of a hawk, even her own ragged breathing. Then, unexpectedly, a figure appeared on a ridge above them. The man's silhouette was stark against the morning sky, and Maria froze, her mind racing. Harlan's body tensed, coiled like a predator ready to strike. "Stay behind me," he instructed, voice low and steady. The figure leaped from the ridge with terrifying precision, landing in a cloud of dust. Several more followed, rough-looking men armed with rifles and pistols, faces weathered and mean. The leader, a tall man with a scar running diagonally across his cheek, grinned cruelly as his eyes settled on Maria. "Well, well," he said, voice dripping with malice. "Looks like we've caught ourselves a prize." And the man beside her, "He's either stupid or brave. Maybe both." Maria instinctively ducked behind a boulder, her heart hammering against her ribs. The wind carried the scent of gunpowder before the first shot rang out. Harlan moved with terrifying precision, muscles rippling as he advanced, his long black hair swinging like a banner of deadly intent. Bullets whizzed past, thudding into rocks and kicking up dust. Harlan's knife flashed as he disarmed one outlaw, then another, moving with a lethal grace that left Maria awestruck. She clutched her own knife, hesitant at first, but then instinct took over. She watched the men's movements, their reliance on brute force, and learned quickly how to anticipate their attacks. Hours passed in a blur of shouts, gunfire, and the metallic clash of weapons. Maria felt a strange exhilaration, a rush of energy she hadn't experienced since youth. Fear no longer controlled her, it fueled her. With each successful maneuver, each blocked strike, she felt herself becoming stronger, sharper, and alive in a way that Silas had never allowed. Finally, the last of the attackers fled, leaving dust and blood in their wake. Maria and Harlan stood among the rocks, chests heaving, sweat and dust coating their skin. The canyon was silent again, but the danger had not disappeared, it had only been delayed. Harlan wiped blood from his knife and turned to her. "You have courage," he said. "But courage alone isn't enough. You need skill, trust, and the ability to let go of fear. You're going to have to rely on all of them to survive the canyon and Silas." Maria swallowed, feeling the weight of everything she had endured pressing against her chest. I don't know if I can ever forget him," she said softly, thinking of Silas's betrayal, his laughter, and his cold indifference. "You don't have to forget," Harlan said, eyes sharp and unwavering. "You just have to move forward. The past will always be part of you, but it doesn't have to control you." They moved deeper into the canyon, the shadows growing longer as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Maria's legs ached, her hands were blistered, and her mind reeled with exhaustion and adrenaline. Yet beneath it all was a growing certainty. She was no longer just a victim. She was becoming something else, something stronger, capable of surviving the world Harlan had thrust her into. As dusk fell, painting the canyon in deep purples and muted gold, they found a small alcove to rest. The fire they built crackled and sent sparks into the cool night air. Maria sat close, gripping her knife and letting the warmth of the flames seep into her bones. "Tomorrow," Harlan said quietly, "we move again. The canyon is full of secrets, hidden paths, dangers, and people who won't hesitate to use violence to get what they want. You'll need to be ready." Maria nodded, feeling the weight of his words. Sleep came fitfully, dreams haunted by shadows, dust, and the laughter of Silas, but she also dreamt of freedom, of a life where she wasn't a commodity, a mouth to feed, or a victim of circumstance. And as the canyon wind whispered through the jagged rocks, Maria felt the first spark of determination that would carry her forward through danger, betrayal, and the unknown. By the first light of dawn, she was ready. Ready to follow Harlan, ready to fight, and ready to claim a life that belonged to her alone. By mid-morning, Maria and Harlan crested a low ridge, and the sight before them stole Maria's breath. A ghost town sprawled across the valley below, half buried in sand, broken boards, and splintered beams. Once, It had been Caraway, a bustling settlement with saloons, a blacksmith, and a small general store, but now it was silent. Windows stared like empty eye sockets, doors hung crooked on rusted hinges, and the wind swept through the streets with a hollow, mournful whistle. This place? What happened here? Maria asked, her voice trembling with awe and unease. Harlan guided his horse down the slope, eyes scanning the ruins. Boomtown gone bust. Greed, disease, violence. People left, some died, some just disappeared. But it's not empty. Not completely. We need to be careful. Maria felt a shiver run down her spine. The stillness of the town was uncanny, almost alive, as if the buildings themselves were watching. She gripped the reins tightly, keeping one eye on Harlan and the other on the shadows of the town. They entered the remains of what had once been the main street. Broken signs swung in the wind, one swinging precariously from a splintered post reading Caraway, General Store. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of decay, mixed with the occasional hint of smoke from some distant half-buried chimney. Harlan dismounted first, moving silently and fluidly like a predator through its hunting grounds. Maria followed, stepping carefully over broken boards and glass shards, her knife ready in one hand. "This used to be the heart of the town," Harlan murmured. "And like the heart, it's still dangerous if you poke at it wrong. People come back here, outlaws, scavengers, and worse. Some looking for revenge, some for treasure, some for nothing at all." Maria's stomach knotted. She had survived Silas, ambushes in the canyon, and the treacherous climb into this valley, but now she faced a new type of danger, the unknown. They reached the center of the ghost town, a crumbling saloon with its front door hanging on a single rusted hinge. Harlan gestured toward it. "We rest here. There's cover, and we can watch the approaches. But stay alert. Even ghosts have teeth in this canyon." Maria lowered herself onto a pile of broken crates, dust rising in small clouds. Her body ached from the canyon trek. Her hands were blistered, and yet there was an odd exhilaration in this desolation. Here, the past didn't weigh on her the same way it had been stripped down, reduced to survival, instincts, and the unrelenting need to stay alive. Harlan crouched nearby, knife in hand, eyes scanning the shadows. "I didn't just pay $8 to get you away from Silas," he said quietly. "That man, he's tangled in things you don't understand. Men he owes money to, men he's wronged. They'll stop at nothing. And you, Maria, you've become collateral in all of it. I brought you because you deserve better, and because I have a score of my own to settle." Maria's hands clenched. "So I wasn't just trapped in a marriage? I was part of a trap?" Harlan nodded grimly. "Exactly. That's why I intervened, because if you'd stayed, those debts Silas's sins would have caught up to you sooner or later. And some debts are deadly." The wind picked up, rustling the loose wooden planks and carrying faint whispers through the abandoned streets. Maria shivered, sensing movement among the shadows. Suddenly, from the far end of the street, a low whistle echoed. Harlan's head snapped toward it, muscles coiled like a spring. He gestured sharply. "Behind cover, now." Maria ducked behind a toppled wagon, her heart hammering in her chest. From the shadows emerged several men, armed and cautious, their faces hard and mean. Maria recognized the look. These weren't just opportunists. They were hunters, trained, methodical, and dangerous. The tallest of the men, a scar running across his cheek, stepped forward, eyes locking on Harlan. "We've been looking for you," he said. "Looks like we found not just him, but her too." His gaze swept toward Maria, filled with a predatory curiosity that made her stomach twist. Harlan didn't flinch. His stance was calm, deliberate, and deadly. "I suggest you reconsider," he said. voice low and lethal, "before you make this town your grave." The leader laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the empty streets. Grave? Maybe. Or maybe we're just here to collect what's owed. Bullets cracked through the air before Maria could even comprehend it. Harlan's reflexes were instantaneous, deflecting shots and closing distance with precision. Maria ducked behind cover, clutching her knife and watching him move like a shadow of fury and steel. Hours passed in a blur of gunfire, shouted orders, and calculated strikes. Maria, though terrified, found herself moving instinctively, ducking, diving, and even striking when a man ventured too close. She realized that survival had reshaped her body and mind. Fear was no longer her master. Awareness and instinct were. By late afternoon, the attackers had been driven off or at least had fled for now. The ghost town was silent again, save for the soft whistle of wind through broken windows and the distant cry of a hawk. Maria sank to her knees, chest heaving, sweat and dust coating her skin. Harlan approached, sheathing his knife, muscles flexing under his bronzed skin. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "And smarter. You learned quickly." Maria swallowed hard. "I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice," Harlan replied. "Sometimes it just takes a fight to see it." They walked through the deserted streets, the ruins stretching endlessly, every corner and broken doorway a reminder of lives lost, decisions made too late, and the dangers of greed and betrayal. Maria felt a strange kinship with this town, with its scars and shadows. It mirrored her own life, abandoned, battered, yet still standing, still capable of endurance. As night fell, Harlan helped her set a small fire in the remains of the saloon's hearth. The flames cast long, dancing shadows across the walls, illuminating the dust motes like tiny stars suspended in the air. "You'll need to rest," Harlan said quietly. "Tomorrow, the canyon's secrets will reveal themselves, and some of them are dangerous. Silas? He's going to show up eventually, and when he does, things won't be simple." Maria stared into the fire, thinking of Silas, cowardly, greedy, and cruel, and a surge of anger rose inside her. She had hated him for years, but now she saw the depth of his betrayal in full. He had not just taken her life for granted. He had sold it, reduced her to a commodity, and invited danger into her world. "I won't let him hurt me again," she whispered, more to herself than to Harlan. "You won't have to," Harlan said, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Not if you trust me and trust yourself." The night grew colder, the wind slicing through the broken walls of the saloon, carrying with it the scent of dust, sagebrush, and the faint coppery tang of old blood. Maria shivered but remained seated, holding her knife and letting the fire's warmth seep into her bones. She thought of the canyon, the ghost town, and the battles she had survived so far. Fear had been her constant companion, but now adrenaline, determination, and a growing sense of agency had taken its place. Sleep finally claimed her, but dreams were filled with shadows, dust, and the echo of Silas's betrayal. Yet among the terror, there was a glimmer of hope of freedom, power, and a life she could shape on her own terms. By the first light of dawn, Maria was ready. She had survived ambush, betrayal, and a canyon that tested every ounce of courage in her body. The ghost town was no longer just ruins. It was a proving ground, a crucible that had hardened her. Harlan stood beside her, silhouetted against the rising sun, long hair falling over his broad shoulders, muscles tensed in readiness. "The day ahead won't be easy," he said, voice low and serious. "But you're ready. And together, we'll face what comes." Maria nodded, gripping her knife tightly. She had no idea what the day would bring, whether Silas would appear, whether more danger lurked in the shadows, but she knew one thing. She was no longer helpless. And with Harlan at her side, she could face the canyon, the ghost town, and the treachery of men like Silas, and lived to see another sunrise. The sun rose over Deadwood Creek like fire spilling across the plains, painting the horizon in gold and orange. Maria sat astride her horse, her fingers brushing the reins nervously, yet her posture was steady and resolute. She had survived ambush, canyon treks, and a ghost town filled with danger. But nothing weighed on her mind as heavily as the thought of Silas, the man who had betrayed her, sold her for $8, and tied her life to his greed, would soon be confronted not just by Harlan, but by the woman he had tried to destroy. Harlan rode beside her, calm and imposing. The morning light gleamed off the tribal jewelry on his bronzed chest and arms. His black hair glimmered in the sunlight, muscles taut and ready. Maria felt a sense of security with him nearby, but she also knew that he trusted her to make her own choices, to fight her own battles. That trust empowered her more than any weapon or plan. "We're close," Harlan said quietly. "The ridge ahead. That's where you'll see him." Maria's heart pounded. She had avoided him for so long, both physically and mentally, but now confrontation was inevitable. She gripped her knife inside her coat, her jaw tight. "I don't know if I can face him," she admitted, voice low. "After everything." "You can," Harlan said, eyes scanning the valley below. "Because you've already survived worse. This is just the last step. And I'll be beside you every inch of the way." As they crested the ridge, the sight below made Maria gasp. Silas was tied to a post in the middle of an open stretch of prairie, his clothes tattered, face bruised, and eyes wide with fear. Surrounding him were the men who had once chased them through the canyon, the scarred leader from before, flanked by his gang. "You came back for me," Silas croaked, his voice trembling. There was no arrogance left, no confidence, just raw terror. Maria's hands tightened around her knife. The years of oppression, humiliation, and betrayal came rushing back in a tide of anger she could no longer contain. She dismounted swiftly, boots crunching on the dry grass, and approached him. Harlan followed close behind, calm, silent, and dangerous. "Silas," Maria said, voice steady and cold, "do you know what it means to sell a person for $8? Do you understand what that makes you?" Silas swallowed hard, avoiding her gaze. "Maria, you're nothing," she said sharply, her eyes flashing with the power of every injustice he had forced upon her. Nothing but a man too small to honor his own family, too weak to see a human being as more than a commodity. The scarred leader stepped forward, sneering. Well, looks like the lady's talking tough now. You gonna finish him off, or should we?" Harlan's hand went to his knife, a low growl in his throat. "Nobody touches her," he said, voice lethal and controlled. "And nobody touches me without regret." Maria took a deep breath, the wind carrying the scent of sagebrush and sun-scorched grass. She realized that she didn't need anyone else to act for her. The anger that had built for years had transformed into clarity and determination. She stepped forward, knife in hand, and faced Silas directly. "I survived the canyon. I survived your greed. I survived men who wanted to kill me. And now you're here, tied and helpless," she said, voice firm. "Do you feel small yet? Do you feel what it's like to have no control?" Silas whimpered, unable to respond. He had expected her to cry, to plead, perhaps to beg, but instead she was the embodiment of strength and judgment. Harlan moved slightly behind her, his presence a silent shield, but Maria didn't flinch. She was no longer the frightened, powerless woman from the Winters ranch. She was Maria Winters, survivor, fighter, and woman who had reclaimed her own life. The gang members exchanged uneasy glances. They had counted on Silas as leverage, on Maria's compliance, but the tables had turned. Harlan's reputation alone was intimidating, but Maria's transformation made them hesitate. "You see," Maria continued, Everything you tried to control, everything you thought was yours to command is gone. Your money, your threats, your power, none of it matters anymore. Harlan's eyes flicked to the gang, assessing their reactions. "Time to leave," he said simply. The sound of authority in his voice carried the weight of a lifetime of survival and combat. The men, intimidated by his presence and by Maria's resolve, began to back away, scowling but retreating. Maria turned back to Silas. "You have a choice," she said. "You can stay here, humiliated and helpless, or you can leave and try to find some shred of decency in your life. But understand this, I will never trust you again. I will never allow you to control me or anyone else ever again." Silas's eyes filled with tears, but Maria didn't soften. She had learned the hard way that mercy without justice was meaningless. With a final glance at the man who had haunted her for so long, Maria stepped aside. Harlan moved forward, cutting the ropes that bound Silas, but keeping him firmly under his watchful eye. Silas stumbled, shame and fear evident in every movement, but Maria felt no triumph in it. Her satisfaction was in the reclaiming of her own power and knowing that she had survived and grown stronger. "Let's go," Harlan said quietly, signaling for her to mount the horse. Maria climbed up, feeling the muscles of her body tense in readiness. Silas, now free, followed slowly, aware that he was no longer in control. They rode in silence for a time, the prairie stretching endlessly around them. Maria's mind raced with everything that had happened: the betrayal, the canyon, the ghost town, the ambushes. Yet beneath it all, there was a quiet satisfaction, the knowledge that she had reclaimed her life. Finally, Harlan spoke. "You've come a long way, not just through the canyon, but through yourself. You've survived fear, pain, and betrayal. And now you're free." Maria looked at him, long black hair blowing in the wind, the tribal jewelry catching the morning sun. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. "But it's also me. I survived because I had to, and because I chose to." Harlan nodded. "Exactly. And that's why you'll survive whatever comes next. The world out here is harsh, unforgiving, and full of men who would exploit weakness. But you've proven you have none." Silas rode behind them, silent, broken, and shamed. Maria felt no pity, no sympathy, only the resolve to continue forward. The man who had sold her had been stripped of his power, just as she had been stripped of fear, and the balance had been restored. Hours later, they reached the outskirts of a small settlement near the creek. The town was alive again, children playing, merchants shouting prices, and the faint sound of a piano drifting from the saloon. Maria felt a rush of relief. Civilization, life, and ordinary struggles awaited, and for the first time in months, she felt she could participate on her own terms. She dismounted, breathing deeply, inhaling the scent of baked bread, livestock, and dust-laden air. Harlan dismounted beside her, eyes scanning the town for threats, then finally relaxing. "This is your choice," he said. "You can settle here, rebuild, or move on. The world is open, and it's yours to claim." Maria looked around, taking in the small town, the horizon, and the vast prairie beyond. For the first time, she felt like herself, no longer the woman sold for $8, no longer trapped by Silas's cruelty, no longer defined by fear. She was Maria Winters, survivor, fighter, and free woman. Turning to Harlan, she smiled, a genuine smile that held gratitude, relief, and hope. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." Harlan nodded, his expression unreadable but softening slightly. "No thanks needed. You earned it all yourself." Silas remained behind, staring after them, a man reduced to insignificance by his own choices. Maria didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her past was behind her, Her power was reclaimed, and her future lay before her, wide, open, and free. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Maria mounted her horse once more. Harlan followed, and together they rode across the open prairie, leaving behind ruins, betrayal, and fear. Ahead of them was a life undefined by others, a life full of possibility, and the knowledge that they had survived together and would continue to do so. The wind swept across the plains, carrying with it the scent of freedom, the promise of new beginnings, and the unbreakable spirit of a woman who refused to be sold, silenced, or controlled again. Maria's heart beat strong and steady. She was alive. She was free. And nothing, not Silas, not the desert, not any man could ever take that from her.